addressing the special theme of our conference, China at Crossroads, New Directions in Politics, Environment, and Economy. The special panel is titled Environment and Climate Change Goals and Strategies of China, India, and the West, Prospects and Challenges. And it will be chaired by Professor Manoranjan Mohanty, Honorary Fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi, and former Chairperson of the Institute of Chinese Studies, and former Professor at the Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. Joining him today are our distinguished panelists, Ambassador Shyam Saran, Member, Governing Council at the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi, and Senior Fellow at the Center for Policy Research, and former Foreign Secretary and Climate Change Advisor to the Prime Minister. We then have Professor Varaprasad Dolla. Professor Varaprasad is Professor at the Center for East Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. And finally, we have on the panel Dr. Rajiv Ranjan, who is an associate professor at the College of Liberal Arts, Institute of Global Studies, Shanghai University, and an adjunct fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi. Before I hand over the floor to the chair to begin the proceedings, let me announce that the event is being live streamed on our YouTube channel, and the recordings will also be available at the platforms of our digital partner for the session, The Print. Some ground rules for the session. The panelists will speak for the time allotted by the chair, when we will mute all the participants. Thereafter, the floor will be open for questions. You may indicate your interest in asking questions by using the raise hand option available at the bottom of the list of participants. Questions can also be sent to us through the chat option. The chair will call upon the participants to ask their questions. The concerned participant will unmute himself or herself, and other participants are requested to keep themselves muted until the moderator calls upon them. I'll now invite Professor Mohanty to welcome our distinguished panelists and give his opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rija. Friends, welcome to this special panel on environmental and climate change goals and strategies of China, India, and the West at this landmark conference in the history of Institute of Chinese Studies. Let me take this opportunity to thank our colleagues at the China Studies Center, IIT Madras, especially Joe and Soli, and the director, Professor Ramurthy, and their initiative and wonderful leadership. We today have a great panel. Mr. Shyam Saran, our lead speaker, is a veteran diplomat and a prominent intellectual of India, contributing significantly to the discourses on critical issues facing the country through his prolific writings and interventions. And we have, he has been introduced already. I will only add that I think he is one of the most informed experts on this issue of climate change in case of India, China, and globally. And, you know, his book on foreign policy, his book, How India Sees the World, is now an important reference point on this subject. Then we will have Professor Varaprasad Dolla, who is one of the few academic experts amongst us who has professionally worked on science and technology in China, also with interest in environment. And he has been researching on this for almost 3 decades. And some of his students are on the screen. We can see them right now. The third speaker is, and he has a very important book, Science and Technology in Contemporary China from Cambridge University Press, 2015. Rajiv Ranjan is already introduced. I want to only add that besides his very in-depth knowledge of domestic as well as foreign policy issues on China, he's also, if I may say, part of the AICCS environment research team. This will be his second major contribution. The first was in our book, China at a Turning Point. Friends, the pandemic which forced us to have this conference online with many disadvantages, but also some advantages, as we can see so many people joining us, has one message which is not much talked about, that the tragedy of such magnitude is the result of the human species' destructive attitude towards nature. In this case, the deforestation pushed the animals to come closer, having lost their original habitat increasingly, to human habitats, transmitting the virus, and there are many theories about it. I remember a striking piece by Saran in the early days of India's lockdown, when the traffic movements on the roads nearly stopped and birds were freely chirping melodiously, and he had a beautiful piece describing that environment. I can't forget that. So we have the theme, which is actually a good moment we are to discuss. We have had US back, thanks to President Biden, in the Paris Climate Accord. The two major statements by President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the virtual climate summit made some important commitments. I'm sure they will come up in our discussion. What I want to add is that this environment that we saw in 2020 has to be understood in a broader historical and civilizational perspective. 2020 was the hottest year in the century, despite the COVID lockdowns and so on. The frequency of storms and cyclones and occurrence of forest fires, melting of glaciers, air pollution. By the way, Delhi and Beijing continue to compete with each other on this. And warming of the atmosphere continued to rise. At least 1 million deaths per year, actually much more, in India and China are attributed to environmental pollution. Hence the importance of this discussion. How far the agenda of the Kyoto Protocol to achieve the reduction in global warming to under 2 degrees by 2050 compared to the pre-industrial age. Whether the Copenhagen Declaration, the Bali Roadmap, above all the Paris Accord are being followed, we shall take up. How far are the countries seriously implementing the Sustainable Development Goals? And the sustainable is the key word there. This is one set of questions we have in mind. Personally, 2 questions have bothered me for a long time in studying global development process and human futures. One is the 200-year-old path of industrial revolution originating in the West and spread throughout the world in course of colonial rule, post-colonial nation building, and reinforced strongly by neoliberalism. Having a perspective that is of conquering nature. The latest manifestation of it is the vaccine triumphalism. We have got the vaccine, so we will conquer the virus, as if future viruses are not going to come. So commitment to science and technology has to be based on understanding the nature of science as a progressive exploration of nature and its behavior. It has to be done with humility, a degree of self-questioning, as knowledge is a continuously evolving process. The growth-centric, the high growth-centric development strategy, the pattern of urbanization, don't seem to indicate any change in our fundamental approach to this problem. On the other hand, indigenous communities living in harmony with nature give us some clue to an alternative approach. They seem to have largely escaped the brunt of COVID-19 until migrants in some areas returned with the infection. That is one issue, the attitude towards this conquering attitude towards nature. The second issue is the big hiatus between national and global strategy of renewable energy production and utilization, air, water, and forest protection and purification management on the one hand, and common people's lifestyle and day-to-day behavior at the grassroots level on the other. So the modern capitalist economy is based on constantly forcing us as consumers to increase our needs, increasing domestic demands and the global demand and supply chain, not just the supply chain. Global demand and supply chain is the common Vikas mantra in India, China, and the West. And this is not likely to lead to sustainable development. These are my worries, but there are experts amongst us who will help us to think more clearly about these questions and more. With these words, may I invite Ambassador Shyam Saran to lead the discussion.
Thank you very much, Manu, for that very profound kind of scene setting that you have done with respect to the kind of existential challenge that we are confronting. And I hope that during this session, with some very distinguished co-panelists who are assembled here this morning, perhaps we can unpack some of these various challenges and see where should India locate itself in relation to what is happening with China, with respect to the United States. Because I think we are now entering a phase of some very, very intense political negotiations with respect to the climate change issue. So let me begin with where China is, because I think the focus of this conference is really looking at what is China doing, because it is going to be a very important piece of the puzzle in a sense. So, Xi Jinping has recently been saying, the slogan he has been using, that clear waters and green mountains are as valuable as silver and gold. That is the slogan that he has come out with. And if you see the way in which it has been then elaborated in Chinese discourse, in Chinese media, it is to say that we have to locate the challenge of climate change within the larger ecological challenge that we are facing. So when you are talking about China building an ecological civilization, it is really trying to see and suggest that dealing with climate change must be part and parcel of, or not just climate change, but environment issues in general, should be part and parcel of the larger developmental discourse. What is the kind of society that China wishes to build? What is the kind of economy China wishes to build going forward, especially with 2049, as you know, is the centenary year, which will be very important. So the first first thing that we must focus on is that there has been an important shift in the kind of strategy that is being adopted by China, saying that climate change action will have to be, in fact, located within that larger context. So that is one point that I would like to make. Now, in that context, of course, in the run-up to the Glasgow Climate Summit, or the COP, that is going to be taking place, it has been delayed, as you know, by 1 year. So it will be taking place in Glasgow towards the end of the year. Now, in the run-up to Glasgow, what Xi Jinping has done is to raise the ambition, in a sense, unilaterally, on several climate change goals to which China is already committed. So, just to give you a certain flavor of what he has said, earlier China had already, as part of the Paris climate change agreement, it had already given certain commitments with regard to, for example, that the non-fossil fuel share of the energy mix will be, in fact, now it would be 20% by 2030. Now he has said it will be 25%. So there has been a little raising of the ambition. Then, as part of the Paris Agreement also, a commitment had been made that the forest areas, which is like a green sink, there would be an addition of 4.5 billion cubic meters addition, which has now been raised by him to 6 billion cubic meters. So there again, there is a raising of the commitment. And whereas he had said that the carbon intensity of China's growth will be reduced by 60 to 65% by 2030, with 2005 as the base year. Now what he has said is that instead of this range of 60 to 65%, we are now committed to making it 65% and perhaps a little more. So that again, a little raising of the ambition. And while at Paris, China had said that it would probably peak around 2030 in terms of its emissions. Now that has been, the additional ambition is that we will achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. So that's another important commitment which has been made. So if you look at these various commitments and what we have been saying about the ecological civilization, essentially what China is doing is that it's positioning itself to be, in fact, in a lead position with regard to the whole issue of climate change, particularly with respect to Glasgow. And why is that so? The reason is that if you are looking at the run-up to Glasgow, and this is something which should concern us as well, the focus is going to be on coal. So if you look at Western discourse today, what it is saying is that the world must rid itself of its, sort of a kind of like the opiate of coal in a sense. That is what they are saying, that unless the world is able to really abandon coal as a source of energy, we shall not be able to meet the commitment of keeping average global temperature rise below 2 degrees centigrade by the time we reach mid-century. And of course, most scientists say 2 degrees centigrade is far too much. We should actually be doing 1.5 degrees centigrade, because even with 1.5 degrees centigrade, we are probably going to get irreversible and catastrophic climate change impacts. So if we are looking at that as the goal, then the general consensus in the West, at least, is that this can only be done if the world rids itself of its kind of commitment to continuing to use coal as an energy source. Now there, of course, the focus is going to be very much on China, and to some extent also on India. Why? Because today, China is number one, the largest producer of coal at 3.3 billion tons per year. Secondly, its coal-based thermal power capacity today is in excess of 1,000 gigawatts. That is the kind of scale that, that we are talking about. Secondly, With respect to additional sort of capacity being built, you'd be surprised to know that though in 2018, China had basically said that it is not going to add any more coal-based thermal power, and it will be retiring some of the older, more dirty sort of coal-based thermal plants that it has. But actually what has been happening is that if you look at the last 3 years, from 2018 onwards, if you're looking at, already China has something like 150 to 160 gigawatts of additional capacity which is in the pipeline. So far from actually giving up coal, we see that whatever may be the commitment given, actually the coal-based thermal power is still increasing, and it's mainly because a lot of the local governments, the local governmental organizations, despite whatever the central government may be saying, still believe that this is the best way to go forward. Now, this is really going to be a very important aspect as to what is the rest of the world going to do with respect to the use of coal in China, because today China, of course, is the largest emitter of carbon emissions. Its emissions constitute something like 28% of the global volume. The next big emitter is the US at 14%, half. And India is even less at about 6%, even though it is the third largest emitter. I mean, it sounds very crazy, it's the third largest emitter, but actually we are nowhere near what the US is or what China is. So this is something that we have to look at. How is the world going to deal with this? Now, the other thing that I want to point out, which is a bit of a paradox, is that while China is the largest coal producing and coal thermal power country, it also happens to be the largest renewable energy producer in the world. So the renewable energy capacity in China today, you'd be surprised, is 726 gigawatts. So it's really very large, and it's growing very, very fast. So if you're looking at solar, for example, or if you are looking at wind power, in both these cases, in fact, China is number one, by far the number one. Solar, for example, capacity today is 240 gigawatts. Wind is almost similar. And these industries, actually, the manufacturing capability on solar and wind is also the largest is in China. So the ability to actually scale up is very much there within China itself. Again, something very remarkable, 45% of global investment in renewable energy is coming from China. So you have this paradox. On the one hand, the biggest emitter of carbon emissions. On the other hand, the largest and the fastest growing renewable energy anywhere in the world. So that's what we are looking at. Now, what China has also done is, again, to fend off a lot of the pressure, but also for its own reasons, one of the most ambitious things that it is undertaking is the emission trading scheme. Which, by the way, was supposed to have come on stream, but still hasn't, but it's going to be the largest carbon market in the world. Here, 7 pilot projects have already been undertaken in various parts of China. And in fact, something like, the extent of the market in these pilot projects is already something like 7 billion yuans. But it is expected that the nationwide emission trading market will probably come on stream, hopefully this year. I think they are probably waiting to come near the Glasgow meeting to really announce this with a big bang. But here, maybe I would just like to, because time is short, I would like to point out something rather important, that you know, what China has been saying is that this emission trading scheme will actually apply with regard to coal thermal plants which are about 330 megawatt capacity. That is the sort of benchmark. But also, it will depend upon what is the sort of energy benchmark which is put. And here the disturbing part is that the Ministry of Ecology and Environment have proposed, in fact, relaxation in terms of the intensity benchmarks for these power plants. It's slightly technical. What they have said is that it should be 1.003 gram of CO2 per kWh, that is kilowatt hour. And if you look at the largest coal-based thermal producer in China, it is the China Energy Investment Corporation. Their actually average intensity compared to what is being proposed is actually 0.719 gram CO2 per kWh across all its plants. So if you take that as the average, then what the ministry is suggesting is actually 30% over allocation of emission allowances, which will then not really add up to very much. So it depends upon what finally comes out of this exercise. But this emission trading scheme, I suspect, will be announced during the course of this year as one of the very major methods of fending off pressures from other countries. Now, with regard to this is with respect to coal, but I would also like to then look at what is the diplomatic scene going to be like. That is the last part of my talk. So as I said, the focus is very much going to be on coal, because if you look at the statements made by John Kerry, or if you look at what is happening in the European Union, some of the things that we will have to deal with is already it is being said that, China, even though it is a very large producer, but it is plateauing. It is not growing as fast as India's coal-based power is increasing. Now, we have to find a way to deal with this. The good news is that maybe not such good news, but as a result of India's growth rate actually slowing down, the kind of projections there were for coal-based thermal power in India actually have not been realized. So if you're looking at current coal-based thermal capacity, it is running at something like 176 gigawatts. Compared to more than 1,000 gigawatts in China. And there is something like 30% overcapacity. Many of the coal-based thermal power plants are actually not running at full capacity. The second point is that there are several old plants which are being retired. And a commitment has been made by the power minister that all those plants which are being retired will only be replaced by renewable energy plants. So that's a very good news. The third point that I think we should make is that while the actually coal-based thermal power is going to increase, but only very slowly, we should also point out that India is one of the few countries which actually has a carbon tax, in a sense. We started off with a 50 rupees cess per ton of coal a few years ago. Today, it is 400 rupees per ton. It is one of the highest carbon taxes anywhere in the world. And we are not taking much credit for that for some reason. So I think it is important for us to, before Glasgow, to get some of these facts out, in addition to what we are doing, of course, with renewable energy. I mean, solar power has been a success story in that sense. The other issue that is going to come up is that of the this border carbon adjustment tax that the European Union is talking about. That is, carbon embedded in products which are imported will be taxed at a certain rate. Now, this has every potential of becoming a kind of a protectionist measure, and in fact, I think that is the main driver of this particular proposal. There is some indication that the US might also buy into it as a means of taxing and putting tariffs on further Chinese exports, because a lot of Chinese exports are in fact industrial goods. Now, a study was done which showed that something like if really it was imposed with an assumption of $40 per ton price of carbon, if that is what is translated into taxes or tariff, then it would affect something like 6% to 7% of China's exports. India is not so much affected because most of our exports are actually service exports. So when it comes to the border adjustment tax, maybe we should think through what our position should be. We should not blindly sort of join China in opposing the border adjustment tax as a kind of protectionist measure, because what some studies show is that India is going to be hardly affected by this. But this is something which needs more research, whether or not it will really affect us. But maybe not necessary that we should join China in opposing this. The last point I would like to make is that the question comes, where does India stand vis-a-vis China in the global negotiations? Now, when I was chief negotiator on climate change, I must acknowledge that we worked very closely together with China. If you look at Copenhagen, for example, it was really the peak of India and China working together. Why were India and China working together at that time? We were working together because both of them were insisting on the scrupulous implementation of the principles and provisions of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Many times people say, oh, India is making this demand or India is making that demand. That is not correct. All that India was saying, and what China also and several other countries, particularly South Africa and Brazil, were saying was, we want you to implement whatever you have committed yourself to in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and thereafter reaffirmed in the Bali roadmap and the Bali Action Plan, which was adopted in 2007. So it was not that we were making sort of independent demands as India, but the reason why India and China were working together, as also the other major emerging economies, was because our position was that there should be full implementation of the principles and provisions of the UNFCCC, and there was complete convergence of view between India and China. Secondly, the outcome that we were looking for of these multilateral negotiations or the new climate change regime, we were saying the principle of common and differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities is a fundamental key principle and is a principle of equity. That is, this is something, again, everyone accepted by consensus in the UNFCCC. And in terms of equity, this is fundamental, and this is where India and China had exactly the same position. I think the fact that we were working together did make a difference in terms of the negotiations which were taking place both at Copenhagen and thereafter for at least some time. What happened which made a difference in Paris? That is where this fundamental principle, the Chinese, in fact, went behind our backs and, in fact, changed this principle by saying common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, and added according to national circumstances, which meant that the whole, international applicability of this principle was given up. And this was agreed with the United States. The United States insisted on this because that was the way that they could demolish the very clear dividing line that we had between developed and developing countries. With this, my view is India should decouple itself from China as far as the climate change negotiations are concerned. Because we are not in the same place as China, as I mentioned to you with respect to coal. We are not in the same place as China with respect to, for example, the border adjustment tax. Our developmental prospects are very different. We are at a different place today with compared to China. So it is time that we really came up with our own strategy and not sort of go back to the basic strategy which we had. As I said, India has a good story to tell in terms of climate change action, whether it is with respect to coal or whether it is with respect to renewable energy. Lastly, are there still areas where India and China can work together? I think it's still important for India and China to engage with each other on the climate change issue, because it is important for us to know how things are developing with respect to climate change. And just before Paris, we had this understanding between Obama and Xi Jinping. I do not exclude, with John Kerry as the climate czar in the United States, that another deal could in fact be made before Glasgow. And some of the things that I have mentioned, initiatives taken by China, is perhaps trying to lead in that direction. So I will stop here. I have a lot of other things, of course, I could have said, but maybe we can take it up in the question and answer session. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Saran. I think the last point where China and India work together on the common and differentiated responsibilities and capacities, and why they began to move on different paths after this according to national circumstances was added, was a very important point. And later on, when the question time comes, I would like to ask why India and the other developing countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America are not coming together to have a joint strategy at a time when China is sometimes with the developed countries and sometimes with the developing countries. China is in that situation, and in what ways we can have a independent, non-hegemonic strategy suited to all the developing countries today. Well, and your story of the coal and the tax regime, I think they were extremely important. Thank you so much. Now we have a broad framework to follow. Now may I request Professor Varaprasad Dolla to make his presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Manoranjan Mohanty. I'm delighted to be here, part of this panel, and share some of my perspectives on environment, particularly focusing on greening the Chinese economy and environment. Let me begin the presentation with the screen sharing. 1 minute. Just a minute. Yeah, I think there is some issue with the screen sharing.
In that case, would Rija or someone help?
1 minute, I think there is. Sorry. Sorry, I think there is a slight issue here with
Samantha, please.
So do you want to?
Yeah.
So do you want to email us the recording?
Yeah,
I have
just
sent
off
it to Samantha and Joe. Yeah. Can you put it up, please?
Yes, sir. So do you want to email us the PPT? We can share it on.
No, I
have
did
emailed
email
that.
it. In fact, it is
Sir,
there on the
if you can just
screen.
email it now,
But I think there is some issue with the
sir, if you
system
can email
here.
it now, I'll be able to share it, sir. I'll just give you message you the mail ID, sir.
Yeah, no, I did send it to you, but 1 minute. Sorry for this technical issue. In fact, I did try that before. But anyway, I think we will try and do it. Yeah, I think it's 1 minute.
Why did we eat this? Please, economy.
Yes, yeah, it's.
Yes, sir. We can see it.
Yeah, you can see that. Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry for that technical confusion. Sometimes, though I've been doing research, but sometimes you are, technologically challenged sometimes. But I think that's the way it is. Sometimes you're so immersed in technology, but not able to use that. So the central focus of my study is basically about greening the Chinese economy and environment, dynamics of technology and environmentalism. In fact, as is clear from the title, the presentation focuses particularly on these four interconnected themes: economy, environment, technology, and environmentalism. And greening is the common thread that runs through all of them. So the rapid growth of the Chinese economy, propelled by a sustained industrialization in the last 5 decades, leading to severe pollution, necessitates a greening economy. Interestingly, greening economy or greening environment is facilitated by technology and environmentalism under the aegis of state and society. Technology being a double-edged sword as a cause of pollution and a source of solution, has a pivotal role in greening the economy and environment, provided it is effectively factored into the development framework. Environmentalism, in contrast to the environmental movement in other countries, with its peculiar state-controlled civil societal process of addressing the growing environmental concerns, has been playing a secondary role. And what I would like to do is to basically locate this greening economy environment through technology and environmentalism in the larger context, especially contextualizing the Chinese economy and environment is imperative given the COVID-19 pandemic that we've been going through. This is, in fact, the immediate context. The conference is being held under the shadows of COVID-19 pandemic that has ravaged the economies, lives, and livelihoods. In this context, we must ask one of the most intriguing and troubling questions: whether the kind of economic development that we are evolving has anything to do with the kind of environment that we have, leading to such a pandemic. In other words, can unchecked progress lead to pandemics? I think this is a kind of a key element that we must grapple with and try and find credible answers. And the larger context is the paradigm shift from the Millennium Development Goals to Sustainable Development Goals is a major recognition of the need to move in the direction of sustainable development from the existing development framework that we have. In other words, we must revisit and rethink the kind of a development framework that we have and move towards what I call a green development framework. Thankfully, the larger community, the global community, with the 5-decade-long deliberations and proposals, is on the threshold of a global Green New Deal framework. In fact, the US, India, and China are quite critical to this global Green New Deal framework, given the kind of differences that exist, as Ambassador Shyam indicated a while ago. So therefore, any failure to arrive at this global Green New Deal framework will actually sound death knell to human security in the long run. And if you look at these two pictures that you see, they actually indicate two very contrasting phenomena unfolding within China. You have glittering cities like Shanghai, and at the same time choking factories, or basically factories that are choking the entire economic development process. So what we basically notice is, with rapid growth, China earned the tag of factory of the world. Consequently, China emerged as the largest polluter and a carbon emitter in the world. China's share in global CO2 emissions is a whopping 25%. In fact, Ambassador Shyam mentioned and put it at 28%, but I think it's somewhere in between 25 to 30%, according to some of the measurements that we have. This, despite the fact that the cumulative reduction of CO2 emissions per unit of GDP was about 18% during the 13th five-year plan. China is the largest producer, nearly 50% of the global production, and also consumer of coal. In fact, China's energy basket is about 60% comes from coal, and this is actually one of the most polluting phenomena that we have. This underscores that there is a robust correlation between its emergence as the factory of the world and also the largest polluter. And this is primarily because China gives primacy to economic growth rather than environment. And if you also see the pollution-related death toll in China is about 700,000 per annum, and that's quite a substantial figure. In trying to address this kind of a choking that is emanating from economic growth, coupled with, of course, the glittering cities, China began to advocate a new philosophy of innovative, coordinated, green, open, and shared development. In fact, innovation-driven development became the central focus of the 13th five-year plan. And this, in fact, is, in some ways, has the potential to change the very economic development paradigm that exists within China. But unfortunately, this philosophy has not percolated to agriculture, of course, to a certain extent, industry and also service sector. Equally, I think that's the point. The key issue is that the new philosophy must, permeate across the various sectors of the Chinese economy. So therefore, China, in fact, needs to make this philosophy a reality by transitioning from development to a green development. I think there are some indications that China is slowly in the process of moving in that direction. The second theme that I would like to throw some light is about greening environment. There are these perils of pollution, as you see from these two pictures, that actually graphically convey to us the extent of environmental pollution within China. But thanks to global environmental regime, there was some sort of greening of the Chinese environment through a policy making. Thankfully, we have the National Environment Policy, which is quite comprehensive and also well calibrated. But the thrust of that National Environmental Policy is incremental in its essence. In 2008, for instance, China came up with this Environment Protection Administration, which was eventually upgraded to the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. And environmental law also evolved over these decades, trying to match up to the changing realities, because the kind of environment pollution that has been unfolding in China, the environmental law had to really catch up. And in 2008, the Chinese government, interestingly, conceived this very idea of green budget. And from there on, it moved on to ecological civilization in 2015. And then more recently, as has been advocated by President Xi Jinping, as beautiful China, making China beautiful. So in the 12th and 13th five-year plan period, we also find a very interesting witnessing of a significant focus on greening the environment. And 2015, Environmental Law Protection of PRC, wherein Premier Li Keqiang declared some sort of a war on pollution. This is this indicates the way in which the Chinese government looks at the environmental condition within China, declaring a war. But of course, so therefore, I think this indicates the enormity of the issue. And then thereafter, the State Council's 2018 report on the state of the environment and on the advances of environmental protection highlighted the progress made so far, while acknowledging the challenges ahead. And in 2018, interestingly, China also tried to match the environmental law with the budget on environmental expenditure. China, for instance, in 2018, spent about $37 billion on pollution control. And by 2020, this has gone up to $57 billion. This seems to be quite impressive, but given the amount of pollution that emanates from China, this is actually inadequate. Expenditure, to me at least, on environment should be proportionate to the extent of pollution that is emanated. So far, there is no commitment from China on capping the carbon emissions. But at the same time, as has been pointed out, China is a signatory to Paris Agreement with nationally determined contributions to 2030 to essentially increase renewable energy to and its share to 25%. And I think that's a very impressive goal that China has set, but hopefully it will reach and thus make a difference to the global environment. And as part of the 14th five-year plan, there's a more focused move towards greening the environment. As you can find out from the following reports, for instance, a blue paper on ecological governance, or Green Action Plan 2019 to 2022, and Belt and Road Green Development. In fact, even BRI is also moving towards greening the environment and also the economy. Thus, China is making a leap forward in law, but unfortunately, limping forward in its effective implementation. In other words, there is a disconnect between a comprehensive and well-calibrated law and implementation on the ground. I think as you can see some of these pictures, conveying a different reality. So therefore, the gulf between the two must be bridged, and I hope the Chinese will move towards that. Then I shall turn my attention to the next important theme, which is technology. In fact, as you see, and as has also been pointed out, that the wind energy and solar energy are, basically making a major difference. But at the same time, we must also recognize that technology is a double-edged sword, as I enunciated at the beginning. It actually both pollutes and also, provides a solution to environmental degradation. In fact, as China moves up the ladder in its technological capabilities, it is increasingly relying on technological fixes to address environmental concerns. The 13th five-year plan enunciated technological innovation to be placed at the heart of development. Environmental science is one of the 10 fields selected to develop robust infrastructure for innovation, making concerted efforts to develop green technologies that are eco-friendly and reduce environmental pollution. Triad of state, universities, along with Chinese Academy of Sciences and Chinese Academy of Engineering, and private enterprises made significant contributions to greening the Chinese economy and environment. About 30 science and technology institutions with a research staff of about more than 30,000 engaged in R&D. According to the white paper on environmental protection, more than 350 of 1,300 eco-friendly technologies have been put to use. In fact, this number, as recently as last year, is even gone up to roughly about 500 of these eco-friendly technologies are being put to use. And the Chinese have also, introduced some of the very important components of, technology, for instance, environmental impact assessment, management, monitoring technologies, and a number of advanced technologies are also being introduced into industrial production, for instance, in steel and cement production, which are considered to be quite polluting, and also clean coal technology. In fact, as China uses 60% of the roughly global coal, especially about 50%, and 60% of its energy basket from coal. Therefore, China has been focusing on clean coal technology production, and I think that's made a significant impact. And also chemical control technology and water pollution control technologies and treatment projects are also a part of this initiative. And renewable energy technologies such as wind, solar, besides hydropower, are also increasing their share in the energy basket of China, making a major contribution to addressing ecological conditions within China. And the fourth theme that I would like to throw some light on is about environmentalism. In fact, if we look at the environmentalism that exists within China is quite different from the one that we find in other countries. environmentalism, and in fact, in China, is also beginning to righting some of the wrongs that have been committed either by omission or by some sort of in some cases, negligence. Given the authoritarian system that prevails in China, there is no scope for a vibrant, autonomous civil society to be critical of environmental pollution and thus make a major contribution to climate change. Thus, the emergence of the phenomenon of environmentalism, which is a weaker version of environmental movement in other countries. Environmentalism is unique to China. It is a state-controlled environmental movement in some ways. But at the same time, a number of NGOs are allowed to operate, but under the strict supervision and control of the state. There are about roughly 3,000 environmental non-governmental institutions operating in China. Well-known ones are Friends of Nature and Good Earth. And these have made, working alongside the Chinese state and, even enterprises have been making significant, contribution to making the environment in China a lot better. You have some of the environmental activists like Liu Qianqiang, who worked with Southern Weekend, who is also known for his very interesting investigative report on tiger leaping gorge dams in Yunnan province. In fact, in one of his reports, he actually refers to data that was put together, which stated that the average age of policemen in Beijing is about 48, given the amount of time that they spend on the on the Beijing streets. And then you also have some of the environmental journalists like Christina Larsen reporting about some of the recent developments within this environmentalism that has been making a difference in China. For instance, Ma Chun, who established this Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs, how he came up with his first online public database of water quality, which made a very important contribution in forcing the various governments, provincial and county governments, to basically consider this data and accordingly make the necessary course corrections. And then you also have Chang Chong.
Varaprasad?
Yes, sir.
A couple of minutes and conclude. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be taking 2 minutes. I'll be concluding. You have Chang Chong, who is one of these environmental entrepreneurs who establishes a green camel bell to make a major difference in greening the Chinese environment. And then judicial environmental activism is also beginning to flourish, but of course quite limited. And then you have Taichou in 2014 and Nanping in 2015, wherein polluting enterprises were fined and some of the individuals were put in prison, making some kind of a difference in the way the Chinese are beginning to factor environmentalism into their framework. And ICTs, information and communication technologies, are also emerging as powerful tools in facilitating environmentalism to evolve into a movement. Let me conclude with a few remarks. Thus, given the current trajectory of economic growth in China, there is an imperative to greening its economy and environment. Factoring technological solution in a concerted manner will go a long way in reducing environmental pollution in China and thus in the world. Similarly, allowing environmentalism to evolve into an effective movement to make an imprint in further improving environment is the need of the hour. Hope the Chinese leadership will move in this direction to ensure environmental security for not only the Chinese, but the entire global community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Varaprasad. I think we have a full picture of the story of growth causing pollution, and then you try to evolve policies, mainly technological response to control pollution. I think that story you have brought out very well, and how the environmental movement still is weak. In fact, compared to India, it is very weak. Well, thank you very much. Now we move to Dr. Rajiv Ranjan, who is going to follow some of these ideas in the context of what coal has done, what is the strategy, and what is the Tsinghua plan for 2030, 2050. Rajiv.
But you also talked about greening the economy.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Let me share my screen. Can you, Venkat sir, can you allow me to share? I'm not able to share my screen. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor Mohanty sir, for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts. I'm honored to be part of this panel with teachers, mentor, and stalwarts of the field. As Professor Mohanty has asked me to highlight what is Tsinghua plan and the carbon neutrality placed by the Xi Jinping at United Nations General Assembly. So I will try to focus on this only to this issue. Content of my presentation would be real politics. This is the content. I would not want to go into details. Let me come to that. Ambassador Saran has highlighted about the slogan that is the blue water and clear sky. So here also, like we have this, there is a slogan politics versus the real politics dilemma within this climate change policy. If we see that during this United Nations General Assembly meeting, President Xi has said that we aim to have this CO2 emission peak before 2030 and then achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. But we have to, again, there are differences and between the carbon neutrality and zero carbon emission and also climate neutrality. But if we look at the previous pledges that have been made by the Chinese leadership, during this Copenhagen, the carbon dioxide emission per unit of GDP by 2045, or Li Keqiang during the Paris Accord, then it looks like this is a huge place. But if you add the variables of GDP, then it looks like that China is not going to decrease the carbon dioxide kind of like in major chunk. So there is a kind of like playing, and in the Chinese, if you read the Chinese discussion, there is also like saying that the Chinese leadership is playing with the words, that they try to place that we are going to decrease the carbon dioxide, but they add the variable that with the GDP. And with once you add the GDP, then it becomes very kind of like low in comparison with in the comprehensive carbon reduction. There is also saying that whether or not Xi has place to reduce our carbon neutrality only about the carbon dioxide or all the non-carbon emission also. So that's again the question about whether the China is going to have zero or net zero emission only about the carbon dioxide or not. So, and that has not become clear, and it's only on the hypothesis of a Tsinghua group school of thought. Now, so this is the slogan politics, and this slogan we have there is a new book coming by Ching Han, and he is talking about how Chinese leadership also plays with the slogan, and then we come with the kind of like a foundation to kind of like where the scholarship, the institution comes and back up that slogan to make it reality. So whether or not this slogan, the whole carbon neutrality is only slogan or not, so we have to see. But it doesn't look like when within the 15 days of President Xi Jinping making a place, we have seen that Tsinghua 2 School has come up with the whole comprehensive plan how to achieve this carbon neutrality. And if we look at the real politics, then we have, as Ambassador Saran has already said, that China also wants to position itself as a kind of like defender of multilateralism and follower of global rules that we have seen during Xi speaking at Davos in 2017, that when he tried to defend the globalizations. So whether we are seeing a kind of new leader or protector of this global realms, so we have to see that again. And if we come again, we have seen in the past that China is kind of little bit hesitant to come forward and share the international commitment and international responsibility. By here, when Xi has placed that China will achieve this carbon neutrality by 2060, that means that there are some backup. And if we have seen that within on 22 September, Xi make a remarks at United Nations General Assembly, and then on 12 October, Tsinghua School is coming up with whole set of policies, advices. So we see here a kind of like there is a kind of a whole thought process is going on within the Chinese thinking, and that how to take this opportunity to push China as a kind of like new defender of global governance. And in fact, for that climate change we have seen. Now, if we look at that how China is going to achieve, then we have seen that China is a kind of like paradox, that China is also producing the electricity is coming from the coal, but at the same time, it also have 70% of the world's solar modules, 69% of lithium iron batteries, and 45% of wind turbines. Even if you see the investment, then it's kind of like more than the combined all European nations or United States. So it's a kind that Chinese are investing a big chunk of money in greening the kind of like technology. Now, if we look at whether it's a top-down or a bottom-up approach, Professor David Toke, he talks about the ecological modernization, and he says that it's wrong to say that it's all about the top-down approach, where we have seen that the technology, the environmental awareness, and change societal behavior also pushes the Chinese government to take care of this in deteriorating environment and climate change. So he talks about ecological modernization and how China is going to achieve that goal. And he also says that China is also slowly but steadily moving from a protectionist economy to a service economy. So he highlights that by following this ecological modernizations, China is going to achieve this reducing the carbon. He also makes a very stark differences between the Chinese approach and American approach. He says that if you compare the Chinese approach and American approach, China looks near to the European countries when it comes to reducing the carbon. And here we have already seen that the European country is trying to achieve this carbon neutrality by 2050, and China has already placed by 2060. So now we are seeing here two climate leaders. One is European Union, and then you have the China is coming as the second by 2060. Now, as Ambassador Saran has said, that here it comes to kind of decoupling of Indian linking with the Chinese climate change negotiation, because China has now itself positioned as a kind of a leader in that field. So I think, again, I agree with Ambassador Saran that here the Indian interest is not aligned with the Chinese climate change goal. But again, that's a kind of like a dichotomy or dilemma when it's come to climate change negotiation. If we remember during the 2000, when China kind of like not unilaterally, but pledged to reduce this carbon intensity after the meeting with the Obama. So here you have this United Nations climate framework where you have a multilateral discussion, but you have a bilateral agreement. That's a kind of like, again, a drawback where the developed country is trying to a kind of break this alliance of developing countries also. And I think this developed country is more successful in a kind of like dividing the whole China, India climate change, a partnership where now the China is in it all together in different league now. Now coming back to what a Tsinghua school has planned to achieve this carbon neutrality. We have seen that there are two schools. One is Tsinghua Institute for Climate Change and Sustainable Development, ICCSD, and then you have this Tsinghua Institute of Energy, Environment and Economy, Tsinghua 3E. If we see the both scenario, they have presented two scenarios where how to achieve this carbon neutrality. One is 2 degrees Celsius and there is another is 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now the both is scenario indicates that that's again the focus is on electricity, that electricity sector would need to get a zero emission by 2050 and start delivering negative emissions. But again here the question is, by having this negative emission from electricity, China is not going to achieve this carbon neutrality. It also depends on the carbon sink and the new technology. So if we see in the following slide that how China is going to achieve. In Tsinghua 3 schools, it's also trying to highlight that it's not power generation from the coal, but it depends on the carbon capture and storage that will ensure that China is getting a net zero emissions in 2060. Now, if we look at the Chinese energy generation in this November 2020, it was like 641 billion, up from 6.8 from the last year. And the China total power consumption is like 646 billion kilowatt, again from this year in again it's high for 2 years. Now, if this is the kind of like a pie chart where it shows that how much electricity is coming from the which field. Again here, the coal is responsible for 68% of power generation. Now, where is this? Both Tsinghua school is trying to reduce the coal electricity generation from the coal and then move to the renewable sectors like wind, solars, and even the nuclear energy. Now, coming back to what is the pathway that it has seen that trying to say that in a Professor Hachien Kun when he presented this his whole presentation about how to achieve, then it's saying that it will like in plateau that in 2030 that China will have to achieve a primary energy consumption, and that will be kind of like long-term low carbon development pathway. And then here it has to buy 5.2 billion ton of carbon will have reached that plateau, and by 2050 the share of coal will fall to less than 10%. But again, there are other school of thought in China that says that in China now it's like 60 billion ton, including carbon, non-carbon, all the greenhouse gas emissions. Even by 2030, it will be 8 billion.
If you could now slowly, in 2 minutes, kindly contribute. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I'm going fast. So now it's so by this predictions, you have to like by 2030, it will be depending on the carbon sink and others non-renewable means to achieve this carbon neutrality. Now, as we have seen, BRN and CPAC, beautiful China, we have already seen that 40% of China investment supports in the framework, it goes to energy. And we have seen that one of the project that is CPAC is also is heavily skewed toward the coal. Now, coming back to, again, Pakistan, we all know that there is a scarcity of electricity in Pakistan, and it also depends on the imported coal. So where we have to like depends, the coal will be coming from, if you will see that there are like kind of like 15 coal or hydropower plant is going under the CPEC plan, if you see that around 45,000 megawatt, 4,500 megawatt of electricity will be generated by the domestic coal, whereas it will be by around 5,000 megawatts of electricity will be generated by the imported coal from the China. Now here comes the trick that we have seen in that China has already banned the Australian coal, and there is a power supply cut in Usi and other regions of that. So there is also debate that China is trying to, is not only ban, but trying to shift from coal to another renewable source of energy. And we have seen in the 40th plan that now the shift is on hydroelectric city, and we have seen that in the focus on the Tibet. So I think it's all mix of like why China have already banned, why China is trying to emphasize on the electricity generation from the water. So it's all makes a sense that China is trying to achieve this carbon neutrality by 2060. Now, this is not a very easy path. If we have seen, we have to like it needs 100 trillion yuan investment by 2050, and it's like if you compare with the European Union, then European Union has to like 260 billion euro, that is to invest in the economy to achieve that carbon neutrality. Now there is a challenges because it's not only that carbon sink and investment, but it's also need to have this deep decarbonization option that we need, that is the hard to address, like particularly steel, cement and chemical industry and process emission, because this is the sector that has not been dealt into the Tsinghua school of thought, how they are going to replace or how they are going to kind of like achieve this decarbonization in this sector. Having said that, now let me conclude by saying that it will be a tough task for China to achieve this carbon neutrality, but what we have seen that both top-up and bottom-up approach will kind of help China to again emerge as a kind of second climate change leaders in coming decades. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. Very important contribution, especially how, on the one hand, coal use is constricted. On the other hand, BRI and such projects abroad are contradictory to that very goal. And the Tsinghua plan is basically an energy management plan. And that was my original question, that is climate change and environmental protection all about energy management? That is very important, very central, no doubt. But greening the environment means also something to do with the type of development, as all three of you pointed out, the type of development, green development, sustainable development. And a step further I go to talk about the type of living, the type of attitude towards nature and our lifestyle. Well, we have very limited time for discussion. May I request Nagaraj Adve, who has been on the forefront of teachers for environmental education, to come in and make some comments and raise questions. Nagaraj. Can you unmute yourself, Nagaraj? Yes, Saurav also. Next will be Saurav Kumar, Ambassador Saurav Kumar. Nagaraj first. Nagaraj, are you able to hear me? Nagaraj? Yes, Nagar. Oh, can't unmute. He says he can't unmute. Rija, can you help?
Yes, sir. Colonel Venkat, I think you'll have to unmute Nagaraj Adve.
Yeah, I think I am unmuted.
Yeah, Nagaraj.
Yeah, no. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you, Professor Mohanty, and thank you all the speakers for what has been a very rich discussion, and in particular, I think shedding light on this recent pronouncements by China Just a couple of observations about that. One is the part about sort of carbon neutrality, or more broadly, sort of what's referred to as net zero. So last month we had organized, the teachers group had organized this talk by Professor Miles Allen at Oxford, who is one of the world's premier experts in this area. And one of the points he made was that essentially he was sort of focusing on CCS. And then one of the points he made was that regarding, say, forests and the expansion of forests, I think also Ambassador Saran touched upon. The point he made was that forests are not permanent sinks. And though the example he gave was about Brazil. So even if China were to sort of expand its forest cover, in the long term, forests are not sort of permanent sinks. And essentially his point was that you need carbon capture and storage. But given the scale at which sort of China is sort of expanding its coal power, is it actually possible to have a CCS that, at least in terms of current technology, is sort of prohibitively expensive and is nowhere shown to be sort of functional or useful at scale, at least currently? And secondly, regarding the carbon neutral plan, is that it talks about a massive expansion of electricity, but there are also currently at least significant energy intensive sectors outside of electricity. For instance, in particular, steel, shipping, aviation, aluminium, plastics, etc., which total currently about 47% of China's GHGs compared to 32% for electricity. So that's a sort of question mark against the plans they've sort of announced, which is also possibly why the date is so far off, 2060. And there was some discussion as to whether the date of 4 decades away, exactly how useful that might be, and in terms of current challenges. Another question I had in mind in terms of this transition, and this is something maybe Professor Ranjan or some of the other experts more familiar with Chinese working class concerns, is in this transition away from coal. And this incidentally is a issue that in India is also being, I think, looked into, is what about the workers who are currently employed in the coal sector? I mean, there are tens of millions of workers currently employed in China. So what are the government's plans for their re-employment, deployment, etc., in the future as China tries to wean away from coal? That's one sort of broad point. The second broad point is, how do these pronouncements of carbon neutrality cope with 3 long-term energy-intensive trends in the Chinese economy? And in particular, urbanization, and that links to the session that was on yesterday.
Yeah.
Secondly, the massive infrastructure development, and thirdly, the need to generate internal consumption. So how does these carbon neutral pronouncements sort of hit against these 3 structural issues of the Chinese, which sort of drives the Chinese economy? And the other driver is political, which I think was touched upon, which is the political and economic elites in the provinces. In particular, in recent, for instance, there was a study by Carbon Brief, which analyzed 4,300 projects in 8 provinces, including Guangdong, Henan, Jiangsu, Shanxi, Shandong, etc., which have a value of $2.95 trillion, which incidentally is exactly the size of the Indian economy. And it shows that many of them, over a third of them, have a huge emphasis on energy, railways, and in particular on energy security. And this incidentally includes oil refining from crude oil. So I'm saying that these drivers, both at the provincial level and the other long-term drivers I was talking about, seem to be the emphasis of the government as it's trying to generate employment post-COVID.
Yeah.
And it includes, for instance, coal to chemical. There are 35 projects that are coal to chemical projects.
Thank you, Nagraj. I think let's move on. There are some more people to contribute. Okay. Thank you, Nagraj. Those are very important questions. Ambassador Saurabh Kumar and then Mr. Subhajit Ghosh. Ambassador Saurabh Kumar.
Thank you very much, Professor Mohanty. I have a comment which is more political really, and a small question to our young friend Dr. Rajiv Ranjan. But first, let me compliment all the 3 panelists for very nice presentations, which were very instructive. Professor Varaprasad's comprehensive picture, environmentalism in particular, and Shyam's diplomatic side in particular. I want to compliment Dr. Rajiv Ranjan for bringing in the Chinese contribution in the BRI, through the BRI, to the worsening. And I see in the chat, Shyam and Dr. Reena Marva also mentioned. So that's no way it can be left out. I mean, that you are just shifting, and in fact, a very expedient way of utilizing your capacity, etc. So diplomatic point that Shyam mentioned, this needs to be brought out. But my comment is, you see, the whole question of commitments and deliveries on those being under the national commitments, cannot be separated from this larger question of transparency or lack of transparency in China. Because there's no way we can know that the stated or the professed commitments are being fulfilled, and what is more, the way the play on words, sloganeering that Rajiv highlighted. So it has to be brought in. I mean, the discourse, and academics and experts, students like us, and then finally diplomats have to find a way of bringing it in. You know, Trumpian contribution of bringing out this feature of China got lost because of the maverick nature of Trump's style. But this is a useful contribution which should not be lost, which cannot. It's a responsibility, actually, to my mind, because the Chinese have gone all out to first recklessly destroy the environment, and late in the day only bother about environment when international costs of reputation became absolutely unbearable. And then now, as Shyam pointed out, have cleverly positioned themselves even as leaders. So all this, the contextualize has to be done. Small question to Rajiv. You mentioned, but it got lost in passing to my mind, the debate in China on slogan politics. I'm interested in the larger question of slogan politics through environment. You even mentioned a book, I think, and I'm sure since you are familiar, I would request you to elaborate, if possible, on the debate within China, the genuine debate on environmental questions, and the extent to which in this field maybe people are ready to speak out more boldly against the official line.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Subhajit Ghosh.
Yes, thank you. So I'm a Schwarzman scholar from Tsinghua University. I'm currently working for a renewable energy company in Delhi. So I think this is more of a comment than a question. I think more of something that I've noticed over the last 1 or 2 years is, like the Indian renewable energy sector, we're just too dependent on China. Before it was 90% of our solar industry, was dependent on China. And yes, our government is doing a lot. We have the performance linked initiatives and things like that. But I don't think it's enough. And I think we should really sort of think about ways in which we can learn from China's growth. So the way China grew using its 5-year plans from the early 2000s to now, although it was very subsidy heavy, I think there's a lot to learn from how the industry has grown, because even with these PLI schemes, with battery manufacturing, with solar, it will not be enough. We can be less dependent on China and more dependent on countries like Malaysia and Vietnam, but a lot of the companies operating here are Chinese invested companies. So we'll always, in some direct, indirect way, be dependent. The second is, I think we don't talk a lot about collaboration, and it's in this whole the way we see so much tension between our countries. There is a lot we can do from just a learning point of view. We have every year the China-India Strategic Economic Dialogue. There is an energy working group, but over the last 10 years, nothing really has come out of these talks. It's mostly been talks. So I'd love to sort of hear on how we can sort of work together and solve a lot of these common challenges.
Thank you. I think we have no more questions. I just want to ask one more question. One I had already indicated, if the Afro-Asian countries, Latin American countries can come together on an alternative perspective, that is to Ambassador Saran. Then to Varaprasad and Rajiv, has there been any discourse on Anthropocene perspective, Anthropocene consciousness? For example, it is very, very nearly absent in India. Only occasionally we find some discussion. Because I'm interested in that, comprehensive perspective on environment, where the attitude towards one does to nature is integral to one's lifestyle as well as regional, national, global development strategy. Has there been any discussion on Anthropocene, that is the human actions impact on nature, constantly informing all decisions and all behavioral actions? So now the round of responses, starting from Ambassador Saran. Sam, please.
So I'm not sure if Ambassador Saran is present. I think he had to leave.
Oh, he had to leave? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, then Varaprasad.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. I think the issue that you raised, is quite pertinent in terms of the discourse that exists in China on Anthropocene. I think if you look at the Western debates on Anthropocene, are quite well advanced. But in China, though Chinese are generally quite committed to learning from the West, especially in terms of industrial production, but on the issue of Anthropocene debate, we don't really see much, debate that actually reflects the Western discourses on that. But however, what we find though in China is, as you very rightly pointed out in your opening comments about harmony between humans and nature. I think it's something that is inherent within the Chinese, ancient and even medieval discourses. But I think there is, to me, an imperative to actually, make this discourse on Anthropocene much more wide, and thereby make a significant impact on the harmonious nature of relationship between human beings and nature. Especially if you look at the entire COVID-19, is generally emerged mainly because of this disturbance within that. That is one.
Yeah, to other questions.
Yeah, to the other question that Ms. Parul Bakshi asked about whether Japan and China, in fact, this is one of the questions in the chat box, whether Japan, with its own focus on green development, green growth, will begin to compete with China or collaborate. I think this is a very important question. Especially if you look at Chinese, technological, advancement, particularly in some of these, green technologies, Japan has been a major contributor. In fact, clean coal technology is actually been, transferred by the Japanese to the Chinese. I think in that sense, I think the Chinese are quite, grateful to the Japanese. But in the way in which now, China has emerged as almost a self-styled leader in taking the global environmental debates, there could be a combination of both collaboration and competition between China and Japan, mainly because the pollution that emanates from China also affects Japan. In fact, Japan is actually quite concerned. So there will be
we have
both
our time by many minutes.
Yeah. I think I'll stop there. Yeah.
Thank you. Rajiv, please. No, unmute yourself.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. So I would go with first Dr. Nagraj. He asked about that the carbon sinking is not a kind of ideal solution, and I think he's right that even in China there is a debate that the nature conservation or carbon sinking will not solve permanently this carbon neutrality. So there is also a debate, and there is a kind of like a green technology. But again, even in the green technology, in a process to have acquire green technology needs investment, and even that green technology also emit carbon. So that's again there is a kind of like dichotomy. So you need to have a balance between both the nature and the green technology. The second question is how the workers or kind of like migrant laborers or workers will be affected by this. According to international labor organizations, by 2030, there will be kind of like 20 million new jobs in China in the sector of green or sustainable development field, like clean energy or automobiles, electric vehicles and all that, instead of 6 million job loss. And the Chinese are also debating that this job loss is not going to be a sudden, but they have a transition period till 2030 and then 2050. So it will not have a kind of like direct impact on the Chinese economy because there is a transition period. Ambassador Saurabh Sharma has asked about the slogan politics. I have referred to this book by Slogan Politics, Understanding Chinese Politics and Foreign Policy by Professor Chang Ching Han. He is basically talking about how the Chinese leadership is more about the slogan and then how this slogan politics put into a kind of like in practice. Here is also, even if you see that, and then someone asked about, and let me finish in 1 minute, that there are like a lot of confusions, whether about this carbon neutrality, climate neutrality, and the emission neutrality. So I think in the morning while I was reading this Kwang Ming Ri Pao, there is a sort of a questionnaire where the Kwang Ming Ri Mao is trying to clarify what are this carbon neutrality, how that will impact the economy, how the nature is going to help us, and so many things. So I think it's a continuous debate within China that how China is going to achieve this carbon neutrality in the long run. So I think because of this time, I would stop here.
Thank you all very much. It was a great panel, great discussion. And I will only wish that our research contributes to a new thinking that takes climate change and environmental discussions into a new level where energy management is but one aspect. Need restriction, the Gandhian call, restricting the kind of need multiplication that capitalism inherently promotes and economic growth inherently responds to and generates. That becomes the issue. And the present preoccupation with high energy, high rise, high speed, urbanization, modernization, and industrialization as the definition of civilization and development and progress. That will be replaced by happy, equitable, sustainable life on earth for all beings. I think to that discourse, hope we will make some contribution. Thank you all very much. Rija, you want to make some announcement?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Mohanty. I would like to thank the chair and all the panelists for an extremely informative and engaging session, as well as the audience for their questions and participation. With that, we come to the end of session 4. We now break for lunch, and our next special session will begin at 2 p.m., where the panelists will discuss the state of China studies in India. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.